The one, the only, Chris Jericho joins us now. Chris, how are you?
Oh, awesome, man. Just keeping busy as I can during the middle of all this and staying creative, which is very important. So it's been, hasn't been as crazy as it could have been. That's for sure. I think the fact that there's all of this technology, including Zoom meetings and that sort of thing, has enabled us to stay fairly connected and fairly locked in. Had this happened, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it might be a whole different story.
Yeah, I've been really grateful just that I've been able to talk to my family. I live in Toronto and my family's in Newfoundland, and I'm just so happy I'm able to just to see them once a week. And I can't help but think, if this is 10 years ago, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, the pandemic had the good friendship and good attitude to wait until 2020 to make this happen. So it's been, like you said, it's been interesting, but at least we've still been able to be creative and create content and stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, than be buried underneath it.
So there's lots I want to talk to you about. I want to start with Dark Side of the Ring. It's really captivated audiences. You narrate it when you appear in an episode. Why were you interested in a show that talks about the darker stories of professional wrestling?
Darker stories for sure, but more of just kind of the stories, the untold stories, the ones that I'd always heard rumors about. And the thing about wrestling is, I don't think people really understand just what really goes into it and how it does take its toll on so many different people throughout the years. So I think as much as you might say, rock and roll has the craziest characters, or the acting and the actors in the 40s or 50s, I think wrestling by far has always had the most colorful characters and the most insane in good ways and bad ways. So because the sport has always been kind of denigrated by the mainstream media and kind of not really taken seriously, now that we get a chance to see a lot of these characters, and some of the stories are darker than others, and some aren't really all that dark at all. If you're looking at, the Brawl for All and that sort of a thing, just kind of more entertaining and interesting stories that people might not know. And the good thing about that show is that even if you're not a wrestling fan, it's very interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a success, is that people can watch it whether they know who these players are or whether they don't. They're just interesting stories about a whole collection of gypsies, tramps, and thieves.
But last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about the idea of giving too much away, that there had been these podcasts which had been sort of talking about the behind the scenes of professional wrestling. And you said to me, sometimes I worry that they're giving too much away. Was that ever a consideration in doing this? A sport that relies on people believing to show the behind the scenes could be damaging. Was that on your mind at all?
No, not at all. I mean, this isn't 1975. I mean, everyone knows kind of what wrestling is, but they don't really know exactly what it consists of. So I think that there's really, it's kind of just showing, like if you used to watch Behind the Music, where you would see the true story of what happened with Lane Staley, or here's the story of Jim Morrison type thing. And this is a lot of those type of tales. And even ones that I never even really knew the whole stories behind. Like I knew for years the Dino Bravo one, and kind of what this, the kind of what the rumors were about him, and the Jimmy Snuka one and that whole thing. So even for me, as a fan of wrestling, but not necessarily a historian, to hear kind of the true stories behind it, it was very, very interesting in a lot of different ways.
One of the episodes, there's a couple of episodes I want to talk about. One in particular is meaningful to Canadian wrestling fans, which is the story of Owen Hart. I'm curious to ask you to tell us who Owen Hart was, in your words.
Well, I mean, you can see it. That's also another one of the reasons why I wanted to do those shows, especially when, obviously I'm narrating them, but talking about them was Owen's show and Benoit's show. And that's why I like the fact that those shows exist, because I said kind of my piece on both, and you can kind of leave it there. Because a lot of people that were involved had never really spoken about it. And for the Owen show, I was adamant that I wanted to be included, because I filmed a bunch of stuff for that show before I got asked to be the narrator. And then one of the first edits, they thought, well, maybe we don't want the narrator being involved as well. And I said, no, you have to include me because Owen Hart was a real influence on me to get into the business in the first place. Maybe the number one influence. So I think that's something that I'm really happy about. The dark side has done is in the midst of all these tragedies, there's been some positives, whether it's Nancy's sister Sandra and Chris's son David kind of reestablishing a relationship and connecting, or whether you have now more than ever this kind of resurgence on interest in Owen Hart as a performer. Because I think one of the worst things about the fact with Owen and with Nancy Benoit too is that they had such tragic demise that you forget just how great they were in the ring. Yeah. And to me, that's what I wanted to focus on, because it's always Owen's last day that they talk about. Meanwhile, he influenced a whole generation of wrestlers, me being one of them. And I think that's something that needs to be brought out and focused on and appreciated and celebrated at this point.
I was a very big Owen Hart fan. That was sort of my era of wrestling, was when Owen was a heel and he was the Slammy Award-winning Owen Hart, and he'd take on his brother. I'm thinking for people who are watching this who aren't as familiar with him and may just know those early days and haven't seen the show yet, what made him so great as a wrestler?
I think he was a pioneer, for one. He was somebody that he did stuff that no one had ever really seen before. And he did stuff that no one had ever experienced. And that's because he was very much a conduit to kind of what the style is now, which is a combination of Japanese and Mexican and English style, UK style, Germany. And Owen had been around the world doing all those things. So the first time I saw him in Stampede Wrestling in like 1987, he blew my mind because he'd already done a little bit of international touring. He was doing all these things that I'd never seen before. So to me, he was one of the first guys that kind of embodied that high flying style, but not just a crossbody off the top rope, things that you had never seen before and still really haven't seen to this day. I remember they show a clip of it in the show where a guy's bent over for a backdrop and he literally jumps on the guy's back and does a backflip off it.
Yeah.
I used to do that back when I first started. And you're like, why? Just because you can. It's cool. Owen Hart did it, so I want to do it too. So there was kind of that element of it. So and then like a lot of great wrestlers, Eddie Guerrero included, he found this personality that no one really expected him to have. And that's what really took him to the next level. And when Owen Hart died, he was only 34 years old. Think about that. He was only 34 years old. He could have had another 15 years in the business, even more. I mean, I'm 49 right now, and some say I'm better now than I've ever been. So he could have been the same because he understood the personality and the character part of it, but also could back it up with amazing wrestling. And WWE in that late 90s period wasn't about the great wrestling. Besides Bret Hart, there really wasn't a lot of guys that really were working hard in that style. Imagine what would have happened if he would have survived another year or two when Jericho, Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko, Kurt Angle, Edge, Christian, Rey Mysterio. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of these great matches that he probably would have had with guys that had the same mindset as he did and were also influenced by him. So I think he would have had a huge career resurgence and really started appreciating the love of wrestling again had he been able to stay with us longer.
Chris, I appreciate that you said your part there. And you mentioned Nancy and David. The other Canadian story in this new season is a 2-part episode on Chris Benoit, who killed his wife and young son before taking his own life in 2007. And I know you knew him well and worked with him. And all I really want is, what was that like to have to speak about him for you?
Well, he obviously was one of my best friends, and you can, once again, you can watch the show and kind of see all the ideas and thoughts and that sort of thing. And it's still one of those stories that to this day really doesn't make any sense, and it never will make any sense. We don't really know what happened, and you can think about it for years and years and years. But the reason why I enjoyed, as much as you can enjoy whatever the word is, the reason why I found it very interesting was that they were able to speak to David Benoit, Chris's son, and Sandra Tofolina, Nancy's sister, and get their take on it for the first time ever. So, I mean, that's a tragic story. There's very few positives in that. but it's a story that needs to be told, because once again, for a while in 2007, that's all anybody talked about. And it almost did bring down the wrestling business in a lot of ways. So I think the fact that you can focus on it and hear it from the right people, Chavo Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho, that's why I did it, because I found out that Chavo was producing it and he asked me if I wanted to be involved. And I was like, if he wasn't involved, I wouldn't have wanted to do it. Because I've said all I have to say. I've written a big chapters about it in one of my books, and I kind of was able to put it all down into a document and kind of seal it away and leave it. But when you had those people involved, I thought it was a story that had to be told for the right reasons by the right people. And I'm glad that we did it. It's an emotional episode. It's hard to tell the story, especially involving Eddie Guerrero, who was also another close friend of mine who passed away very early as well. But the wrestling is not easy, and I want people to know that this is not all just, oh, it's all fake and blah blah blah. I mean, this is real life stuff that happens. If wrestling is a big war and we're one big army, not everybody makes it out alive. And I think those stories need to be told, and told from the human standpoint of these people, and that they were actual living, breathing parents, brothers, fathers, friends. And that story needs to be out there and told, like I said.
If you're just tuning in, my guest is Chris Jericho. Take a listen to this.
Jackson DeVille! Oh, no, that's affected Jackson DeVille!
Thanks for coming, pal. Not a popular move there.
That's a clip from the recent All Elite Wrestling pay-per-view show, Double or Nothing. In that, you heard my guest, Chris Jericho, knock out the Jacksonville Jaguars mascot, Jackson DeVille, during the Stampede Stadium match in an empty football stadium. A lot to take in for non-wrestling fans in that sentence. Wrestling is finding a new way to continue during this pandemic. Tell me about that match.
Well, you got it right the first time. It was the Stadium Stampede match. And don't get me mixed up, because it took me long enough to figure it out. Stadium Stampede. We're very fortunate in the fact that AEW is owned by the Khan family, who also owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we have access to the stadium. And I think we were looking for matches and scenarios to focus in on in spite of the pandemic and not because of it. I think we were looking for things to keep our shows kind of exciting and relevant. And what kind of a match could we do in the middle of a pandemic when we can't have fans in the arenas? That might be something that ends up being a huge positive. And the Stadium Stampede was that. I mean, it wasn't so much a match in that it was a short film. It was a spectacle. It was they call it cinematic wrestling, but I just call it entertaining. And I think we took advantage of this time that we had in this giant empty stadium that we were using to our advantage to kind of create something that you never would have seen had there been no pandemic. And as a result, we have a piece of work that some people are saying is the greatest match of all time. And to me, it's one of the best things I've ever been involved in. Is it a tried and true wrestling match? Of course not. It was never supposed to be. It's a Stadium Stampede. It's completely different. And I think we kind of set the tone of what these types of matches can be in the future.
Obviously, you're professionals, and obviously you're incredibly gifted storytellers. But I have to imagine it's weird wrestling without a crowd.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it sure it is. I mean, it's just like playing in a band. If you have a great crowd, that can cover up.
I played in a lot of bands that can't get a crowd, by the way.
But the point is, if you have a small crowd, if they're excited and energetic, it makes you have a better show. And you could go out there and put on the best technical performance, and if nobody cares, then you didn't have a good show. So taking out the third element of this crowd is putting all of us behind the eight ball. But we had to get used to it very quickly, and we were also smart enough that we were able to put a few people in the crowd, a couple of employees, other wrestlers, and at least we had some kind of noise. And like you said, even if it's only 10, 15 people there, we've all played in bands and wrestled matches in front of less. My record is 7.
Oh, wow.
For both Fozzy and wrestling. 7 was the magic number for some reason. But so it's very strange. This week, I actually had my very first single match on Dynamite in front of no people, and it was weird. I mean, we did the Stampede, we did a street fight, but actually being in the ring, having a lock-up, tackle, drop-down, leapfrog match, it was very strange. But what other choice do we have? It's something that we had to do. It's something that we did do, and as strange as it was, we've continued to put on great shows and move our storylines forward. The thing that I say quite often is, man, it was so great. If only there were people here, it would have been so much better, but there's no people there. So you have to do what you can.
Right.
You can't hold off all of your storylines and wait for another month or 2 months or who the hell knows how long it's going to be to keep things moving forward.
But I know the WWE has come under fire for having wrestlers work during COVID. There can't be social distancing in a contact sport like this. What are you and All Elite doing to stay safe while you do this?
Well, I don't know what anyone else is doing, but I do know that from the start, we always get temperature checked. But the last 3 tapings, now we're getting blood tests for COVID, where they prick your finger and they put it kind of, it's kind of like a pregnancy test where it tells you quite quickly if you have the antibodies, if you've had them, if they're still in your system. And thankfully, our whole roster has turned up negative for that. There was one small instance that if you get one bit of it that says you might have it, you take another test, and that one showed up negative. So we've been very lucky in that no one's had it. But, like I said, it's pro wrestling, right? So there's only so much social distancing you can do. But for whatever reason, we were deemed essential in Florida. So we just kept going. We were just very careful getting into the venues and getting into the arenas. And thankfully, nobody's gotten sick. And as a result, we've been able to continue putting on great shows and making Wednesday nights a destination for people that have nothing else to look forward to that week for quite a few people. So we're lucky that and happy and honored that we can still keep our fans excited and happy and looking forward to something.
How about you? What are you looking forward to doing when this is all over, when the lockdown is over?
I mean, just being in front of crowds again. You know what I mean? That's such a big thing for what I do. I feed off that. We've had 2 of our tours postponed with Fozzy, getting back on the road with the band and playing in front of an audience, of course. But like we said, other than that, man, I've still been busy doing all the press and doing podcasts and the Saturday night special that I do every Saturday night on Facebook and YouTube, and starting bands, recording and still continuing going. But it's the live crowds and being around people and I missed all the best gigs this year. Elton John canceled, Stones canceled, Guns N' Roses canceled, Kiss is postponed, Iron Maiden canceled. All my favorite bands aren't going out this summer. So I'll be happy to just grab a drink and go see a band play as well as soon as we can.
Anything you want to say to Canadians who are watching this right now?
Hey, all I can say is I found out that AEW just beat SmackDown, I think, this week in ratings. So we're really excited to come to Canada. I know it was on the books at some point to come to Toronto, probably this summer, but that's not going to happen now. But Canada's always been a great wrestling country. Obviously, it's my home country. So we're excited to bring AEW to Canada and just come back to Canada in general. I miss the homeland.
I bet you do. We miss you too. Chris, thanks for your time.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.